When a group of powerful men in suits thought they could quietly erase the lives of elderly residents, they never expected the sound of roaring engines to shatter their plans. It began as whispers in a small community, seniors trembling at the idea of losing the homes where they had built decades of memories. But those whispers turned into cries for help, and those cries reached ears that no politician ever wanted to face. A motorcycle club with a reputation for loyalty and a code of justice sharper than any law. The image of fragile hands packing up belongings, unsure of where to go, clashed brutally with the lavish promises of a politician who saw only profit where lives were rooted. For the seniors, it wasn't just about walls and roofs. It was about dignity, history, and the last safe place they could call home. And when no one in power would listen, unlikely heroes rolled in on two wheels, leather jackets glinting under the sun, prepared to stand where others had fled. What unfolded next wasn't just confrontation. It was the collision of two worlds. Corruption wrapped in authority versus raw courage born out of brotherhood. The politician had underestimated not only the seniors' resolve, but also the fierce loyalty of those who refused to watch injustice unfold in silence. It was not about chaos or rebellion. It was about something far deeper. Each biker who arrived knew they were defending more than homes. They were protecting stories, memories, and the very essence of human respect. Their engines thundered like a warning, shaking the ground beneath the politician's polished shoes, a reminder that power is fragile when it stands against truth. And so, on that fateful day, the seniors stood taller, not because they suddenly grew stronger, but because they were no longer alone. They had warriors by their side, warriors who spoke not with words, but with presence, daring anyone to strip away what rightfully belonged to those who had already given a lifetime to the world. The politician, once confident and untouchable, was about to discover that some battles cannot be bought, silenced, or ignored. The day the eviction notices arrived, silence fell over the senior community like a heavy storm cloud. Letters printed in cold, official language told men and women in their 70s and 80s that they had less than 1 month to leave the only place they could call home. Some wept quietly, clutching photographs of loved ones who had already passed, while others stared blankly, unable to process that their final years would be spent wandering without shelter. It was not just an eviction, it was the erasure of their dignity. In the halls of power, the politician behind the decision celebrated. He saw land, profits, and new developments, not human beings. His smile widened as he envisioned luxury complexes rising from the rubble of the seniors' modest homes. To him, their wrinkles and frailty symbolized weakness, a barrier easily swept aside. He underestimated the strength that rises when desperation meets injustice. As the news spread, neighbors tried to rally, but their voices were drowned out by bureaucracy and threats. The seniors felt invisible, as if society had turned its back on them. Each day that passed brought greater fear, and the sound of packing boxes echoed through hallways that once carried laughter and warmth. It seemed that their fight was over before it had even begun. But stories of injustice have a way of traveling, reaching hearts that beat to a different rhythm. In a nearby town, a motorcycle club known not just for their roaring engines, but for their fierce loyalty, heard whispers of what was happening. They were men and women hardened by life, scarred by battles on the road and in their pasts. But their creed was unshakable. Never abandon those who cannot fight for themselves. When they gathered in their clubhouse and the news was laid out before them, the air turned electric. One of the oldest members, his beard streaked with gray, slammed his fist on the table. "They've chosen the wrong people to push around," he growled. Eyes met across the room, nods of agreement sealing a decision that would soon shake the city. Engines would roar not for rebellion, but for justice. The first time the seniors saw the motorcycles rolling into their quiet neighborhood, their fear turned into awe. Dozens of riders in leather jackets and steel helmets lined the streets, the sunlight glinting off chrome as if announcing that hope had finally arrived. For the elderly, who had felt abandoned and powerless, this display was more than muscle. It was protection made flesh. The leader of the club stepped forward, removing his helmet to reveal a face weathered by years of hardship. He spoke softly, his voice steady, yet carrying a power that silenced the crowd. "No one is throwing you out of your homes," he promised. "Not while we stand here." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of unbreakable loyalty. For the first time in weeks, the seniors allowed themselves to breathe. The politician, however, did not remain silent. Enraged by what he saw as a direct challenge to his authority, he called in reinforcements. Lawyers filed injunctions, police patrols circled the neighborhood, and threats were delivered with cold precision. But each move he made was met with the unyielding presence of the bikers, who took shifts day and night to guard the seniors' doors. The confrontation grew into a spectacle. News cameras arrived, capturing images of frail elders standing shoulder to shoulder with tattooed riders, a contrast so striking it captured the hearts of viewers across the nation. What was once a local injustice became a national conversation, and the politicians' carefully constructed image of power began to crack under the weight of public scrutiny. Still, the politician underestimated them. He believed the bikers would tire, that they were fueled only by adrenaline and rebellion. But what he could not understand was that this was no ordinary fight. For the bikers, every senior they protected reminded them of their own mothers and fathers, of the sacrifices of generations past. Their engines were fueled not by gasoline alone, but by loyalty, love, and the unshakable truth that some battles must be fought at any cost. As days turned into weeks, the bond between the seniors and the bikers grew stronger. The elderly, once timid and fearful, began to find courage in the presence of their unexpected guardians. Where silence and sorrow had once filled the community, laughter began to return. Children of the bikers visited, playing on porches and bringing life to the streets, while seniors shared stories of their youth, tales of sacrifice and resilience that captivated their listeners. What had begun as an act of protection was now blossoming into something far greater, a family born out of struggle. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light over the neighborhood, a frail woman named Margaret stood on her balcony with trembling hands. She had lived in her home for over 40 years and had nearly given up hope of seeing her final days in peace. With tears in her eyes, she called out to the bikers below, "You've given us back our dignity." Her words hung in the air like a blessing, and the riders, hardened by battles of their own, felt their throats tighten. But not everyone celebrated. The politician's anger festered into obsession. He met behind closed doors with wealthy developers, plotting ways to break the resistance. "They are nothing more than criminals in leather," he sneered. His pride demanded a victory, and his greed would not let him abandon the fortune he believed was his to claim. With every passing day, he became more ruthless, more determined to crush not just the seniors, but the bikers who stood in his way. Police intimidation escalated. Patrol cars blared their sirens late at night, shining spotlights into the seniors' windows in an attempt to scare them out. Yet every time the authorities arrived, the bikers were already there, silent, unmoving, their arms crossed as their engines rumbled low in defiance. They did not need to raise a fist. Their presence alone was enough to hold back the tide. And so, a line was drawn. On one side, greed and power driven by a corrupt man who believed money could silence truth. On the other, a brotherhood forged by loyalty and strengthened by the fragile but unyielding spirits of those who refused to be erased. The stage was set for a confrontation that would decide not just the fate of a neighborhood, but the meaning of justice itself. The politician's breaking point came when national media turned the story into headline news. Reporters called the seniors the forgotten generation, and the bikers their unlikely angels. Images of frail hands gripping strong leather-clad arms spread across social platforms, igniting outrage and admiration alike. Ordinary citizens began sending donations, food, and letters of encouragement to the community. The politician had tried to silence a story, only to give birth to a movement. In desperation, he arranged a press conference, standing behind a podium surrounded by flashing cameras. His words dripped with false concern. "This is about safety," he declared, claiming the homes were unfit for habitation and promising luxurious alternatives. But the public had already seen through his performance. Seniors held up signs outside the venue, reading, "We want our homes, not your promises." The crowd cheered not for him, but for the people he tried to erase. Meanwhile, Inside the community, preparations were underway. The bikers reinforced doors, set up watch posts, and organized shifts so no senior would ever be left vulnerable. What had started as protection had transformed into strategy. They weren't just standing against a corrupt man. They were building a fortress of hope. Even the friliest of seniors took part, offering meals to the riders, knitting blankets for cold nights, and sharing words of encouragement that became fuel for weary souls. The politician's frustration reached new heights. He sent hired men under the cover of darkness to intimidate the residents. Yet the bikers were waiting. The sound of engines roared through the night, scattering the intruders before they could even take a step inside. It was no longer just about defending homes. It was about sending a message. This community was untouchable. And in that moment, something remarkable happened. The seniors, once silenced by fear, stood beside the bikers at dawn, their heads held high. Wrinkles etched by time now carried lines of defiance. They were no longer victims, but warriors of memory and love. For the first time, the politician realized he wasn't simply fighting against bikers. He was fighting against the unbreakable spirit of an entire generation. The following morning, the politician attempted a different tactic: intimidation through legal threats. Lawyers arrived with stacks of papers, citing eviction orders, zoning laws, and technicalities meant to confuse and overwhelm the seniors. Yet when they presented their documents, they were met with a wall of unwavering resolve. The bikers, sitting calmly on their motorcycles, looked on with piercing eyes that silently communicated, "We will not back down." The seniors read the words, but the fear that had once gripped them had vanished. The community began to transform under the watchful presence of their protectors. Gardens, once neglected, were tended again. Small businesses reopened as the attention brought curious visitors. Even children from neighboring towns came to see the unlikely alliance of youth and age. Laughter, once muted by fear, returned in full force. The neighborhood was alive, resilient, and united, a living testament to the strength of human connection in the face of oppression. News outlets, initially skeptical of the bikers' motives, began interviewing members of the club. They told stories not of rebellion or lawlessness, but of loyalty, compassion, and the principle that protecting the vulnerable was worth any risk. People across the country, inspired by their courage, reached out to organize support networks for seniors facing similar threats. What started as a local crisis had ignited a national conversation about justice, empathy, and the responsibility of those with power. Despite mounting public pressure, the politician's arrogance remained unshaken. He doubled down on threats, publicly calling the bikers thugs and accusing the seniors of being manipulated. His words were sharp, intended to instill fear, but the community only grew stronger in response. Every insult, every attack, served as fuel for the fire, uniting the seniors and bikers with a deeper understanding. Courage is contagious, and injustice is a call to action. One evening, under the amber glow of streetlights, a meeting took place. The elders sat alongside bikers, discussing ways to protect not only their homes, but the dignity of their entire neighborhood. Plans were made, strategies shared, and lessons passed down from one generation to another. The realization was clear. This fight was bigger than property. It was about respect, memory, and proving that together, ordinary people could stand against the seemingly unstoppable forces of greed and corruption. The tipping point arrived when the politician organized a public eviction attempt, believing sheer force would break the community. Trucks and moving vans lined the street, and a squad of law enforcement prepared to enforce his orders. But the bikers were already there, strategically positioned at every entrance, forming an unyielding line of defense. Their engines roared as if to announce that no force on earth could penetrate the bond they had formed with the seniors. As the eviction began, the seniors emerged from their homes, standing side by side with their protectors. One elderly man, cane in hand, raised his voice over the roar of engines. "These are our homes. You will not take them." His words, once fragile and tremulous, now carried the weight of decades of life experience, wisdom, and undying courage. Those watching were struck silent, realizing that power is meaningless when opposed by conviction and unity. Journalists captured every moment. The fear in the politicians' eyes, the unwavering focus of the bikers, the hope shining from the seniors' faces. The story spread like wildfire. Citizens from across the city arrived to support the community, holding banners, singing songs of resistance, and chanting in unison. It was no longer a fight between a corrupt politician and a few residents. It had become a movement, a spectacle of human dignity triumphing against oppression. Inside his office, the politician's confidence crumbled. Calls from developers were met with silence. Public opinion turned sharply against him, and even allies within law enforcement questioned his judgment. For the first time, he faced the reality that money and position were insufficient to crush spirits united by courage. Every plan he made was countered not with violence alone, but with a moral power stronger than he could ever comprehend. Meanwhile, the seniors and bikers did not celebrate prematurely. They knew vigilance was necessary. Each day could bring a new threat. Yet, in the quiet moments, shared smiles and nods of understanding passed between them. The bikers had proven their commitment, and the seniors had discovered an inner strength they thought long gone. The fight was far from over, but the tide had undeniably shifted. The oppressed had found their defenders, and the oppressor had found resistance in its purest, most inspiring form. The politician's pride would not allow him to surrender quietly. Cornered, he turned to darker methods, hiring men in suits to spread rumors about the bikers. Stories of violence, theft, and criminal past were plastered across newspapers and television screens, painting them as dangerous outlaws rather than protectors. For a moment, doubt crept into the minds of some outsiders who had never set foot in the community. But the seniors, who had seen the bikers sacrifice sleep and safety for their sake, refused to believe the lies. In fact, the attacks only strengthened the bond. Seniors began writing letters to editors, calling radio stations, and recording heartfelt testimonies online. They spoke of the nights when bikers kept watch outside their doors, of meals shared, of laughter that returned after weeks of despair. These stories spread far faster than the politician's slander, touching the hearts of strangers who saw through the deception. The truth, carried on the voices of the elderly, became a weapon stronger than any smear campaign. As the tension rose, the bikers never once lashed out with reckless violence. Their discipline and unity became impossible to ignore. They knew the world was watching, and every action mattered. They stood tall, their presence unshakable, their eyes steady, their loyalty unquestioned. They weren't simply guarding homes. They were guarding the truth, showing the world that justice could wear leather and ride on two wheels. Late one evening, a storm rolled in, rain lashing against windows and thunder echoing through the streets. While the seniors huddled inside, the bikers stood firm in the downpour, engines rumbling in defiance. Their silhouettes against the lightning became an unforgettable image, a brotherhood refusing to yield, even when nature itself tested their endurance. To the seniors, it was more than protection. It was love expressed through sacrifice. And in that storm, the seniors whispered prayers, not just for their homes, but for the men and women who had become their shield. The realization settled deeply. They were no longer simply fighting to keep walls and roofs. They were fighting for one another, for the promise that no person, young or old, should be cast aside for greed. The storm passed, but the fire in their hearts only burned brighter. The politician, enraged by his failures, resorted to one final desperate plan. He called a secret meeting with developers and enforcers, swearing that the neighborhood would fall by the end of the month. But word of his schemes leaked out, carried by an insider who could no longer stomach the cruelty. The bikers, upon hearing of the plan, knew the fight was about to reach its climax. They prepared themselves, not with fear, but with calm determination. As the deadline approached, trucks and machinery gathered once again, this time heavier and louder than before. The politician arrived in person, his expensive suit gleaming as if victory were already his. But when he turned the corner, what he saw stopped him cold. Not only were the bikers lined up in force, but hundreds of citizens, neighbors, activists, strangers from distant towns, stood united with the seniors. The small community had become a fortress of people, an unshakable wall of humanity. The seniors themselves were at the front. They held hands, their frail bodies forming a chain stronger than steel. Behind them, the bikers revved their engines, the sound rolling like thunder, amplifying the message. No bulldozer, no order, no force of corruption would prevail here. The air buzzed with a tension that felt almost sacred, as if history itself had paused to witness the moment. The politician stepped forward, microphone in hand, ready to deliver threats. But his voice was drowned out by the chants of the crowd. Let them stay. Let them stay. The sound rose like a tidal wave, crashing over his arrogance. Cameras flashed, capturing his humiliation. His once powerful words turned to stammers. His posture faltered, and for the first time, he looked smaller than the people he sought to destroy. In that moment, it became clear that the battle had shifted beyond politics and papers. This was no longer about homes alone. It was about the soul of a community and a reminder that unity, love, and courage could topple even the most corrupt of giants. And though the politician still stood there, clinging to his fading pride, everyone watching knew his time was ending. The following days became a turning point. While the politician scrambled behind closed doors, trying desperately to salvage his influence, the community only grew stronger. Donations poured in from across the country, food, blankets, and funds to cover legal defenses. Lawyers volunteered their time, determined to fight the eviction orders in court. What once seemed like a hopeless struggle for a handful of seniors had transformed into a nationwide stand against corruption. Inside the neighborhood, the bikers and seniors lived side by side, sharing meals and laughter. One rider, known for his intimidating tattoos, spent afternoons playing chess with an elderly veteran. Another biker carried groceries for a woman who could barely walk, insisting with a smile, "You've carried enough in your life. It's our turn now." These simple acts revealed the heart of the movement. Not rebellion, but compassion. The story was no longer about bikers alone, nor seniors alone, but about the family they had created together. Meanwhile, the politician's mask continued to crumble. Investigative journalists dug into his past, uncovering shady deals and secret bank accounts tied to developers. Each revelation was a blow to his reputation, stripping away the aura of authority he had once wielded with ease. His speeches fell flat, his allies abandoned him, and his arrogance turned into desperation. The very empire he built on greed was collapsing before the eyes of the nation. One evening, as the sun set behind the rooftops, the seniors gathered with the bikers in the heart of the community. They lit candles, not as a protest, but as a symbol of unity. The flames flickered against the night, illuminating faces old and young, hardened and gentle, all united by a shared truth. They had already won something greater than any legal battle. They had reclaimed their dignity, their strength, and their voice. And though the politicians still threatened and schemed, the people were no longer afraid. Fear had been replaced by hope, silence replaced by song, and weakness replaced by courage. What stood before the world was not just a community fighting eviction. It was a testament to the power of standing together, proving that even the smallest voices can shake the foundations of corruption when amplified by loyalty and love. The final showdown came in court, a sterile room filled with tension as the politician presented his case for eviction. His lawyers spoke of zoning violations, safety concerns, and economic opportunity. But when it was time for the defense, something remarkable happened. One by one, seniors took the stand. They told stories of raising families in those homes, of battles fought for their country, of decades spent building lives brick by brick. Their words carried a weight no legal jargon could erase. The bikers, sitting quietly in the back of the courtroom, became symbols of solidarity. Their presence alone reminded the judge and jury that this was not a case about laws alone. It was about humanity. And when one biker was asked why they risked everything for people they barely knew, his answer silenced the room. Because they deserve to live with dignity. Because one day, we'll all grow old. And if we don't protect them now, who will protect us then? The courtroom erupted in murmurs, the truth striking like a hammer against stone. For the first time, the politician's face betrayed fear. His carefully crafted narrative collapsed under the sheer power of honesty and compassion. By the time the verdict was read, It was no longer a question of winning or losing for him. It was about surviving the shame of defeat. The judge's decision was clear and firm. The seniors would keep their homes. The eviction orders were nullified, the development halted, and an investigation launched into the politicians' dealings. The room erupted in cheers, tears streaming down the faces of the elderly who had feared this day would bring their end. For the bikers, it was a quiet victory, one sealed not with celebration, but with a simple nod to their new family. And so, the community stood victorious, not because of power, wealth, or influence, but because they refused to give up. The bikers had come not as saviors, but as brothers and sisters in arms, teaching the world a lesson it would not soon forget. When loyalty meets love, and courage meets truth, even the strongest walls of corruption crumble to dust. In the end, what began as a desperate struggle against eviction became something far greater, a story of unity that proved the power of ordinary people when they stand together. Seniors who once felt forgotten found their voices again, and bikers who were judged by appearances revealed hearts filled with loyalty and compassion. Their victory was not just in keeping their homes, but in reclaiming their dignity and reminding the world that no one is too small to make a difference when courage leads the way. The downfall of the politician was more than the collapse of a single corrupt figure. It was the crumbling of arrogance in the face of truth. His schemes, built on greed and lies, shattered when confronted with love, sacrifice, and resilience. What he saw as weakness turned out to be the greatest strength, the determination of people who refused to bow to fear. His defeat stands as a warning to all who believe that power can silence justice. But beyond politics, this story carries a message for every one of us. It asks us to look at our own lives and ask, when injustice rises, will we stay silent, or will we rise with courage? It reminds us that heroes are not always the ones in uniforms or on podiums. They can be men and women in leather jackets, or elders who refuse to leave their homes. True strength is not measured by wealth or status, but by the love and loyalty we show to those who cannot fight alone. As the engines grew quiet and the community celebrated, the lesson remained clear. Walls may protect houses, but people protect homes. And when people unite, no force of corruption can break what is built on faith, dignity, and brotherhood. This was never just a fight for property. It was a fight for humanity itself. If this story moved you, let it be a reminder of the power we all carry when we choose to stand for what is right. Share your thoughts in the comments, because your voice matters too. And if you believe more stories like this deserve to be told, support this channel by subscribing and liking this video. Together, we can keep these stories alive and inspire many more to never give up when faced with injustice.